Howdy gamers, in this video I'm going to be going over all the rune options that Zoe has. Since she has so many different Keystone options and they're pretty impactful for the different matchups that she plays into, I'm going to give a brief rundown of why each one has their use cases, and then later in the video I'll break down every single rune that's really usable for her. But I would figure that most people are coming just for the gist of it. So the gist of it is with Electrocute. Electrocute's an okay option for bursting targets, and this is good into most control mage matchups in which you're both not hyperscaling, and then whoever hits first really wins. Electrocute gives you enough damage to do so, and then puts you in the domination tree, and everything in the domination tree is pretty generally useful for Zoe. And then you have the option of going into the sorcery tree or the inspiration tree second. But generally put, Electrocutes just for the burst onto a single target and is really useful into matchups where you can just 100 to 0 a target. Electrocute becomes really bad into matchups in which you can't do that. So against tankier champions like Ornn or Galio in the mid lane, Electrocute's not going to be doing anything against them. Another option you have is Dark Harvest, pretty similar to Electrocute, where you're still in the domination tree. The difference with Dark Harvest is that Dark Harvest gives you more of a scaling option, but still gives you damage, versus the other control options you could have with, let's say, Unsealed Spellbook. With Dark Harvest, I think it's an okay option into those tank matchups when you don't need the utility from something like Unsealed Spellbook, because with Dark Harvest, you're getting less damage, but you are able to have this stacking component to it, and against tank matchups, it's not about killing them in lane anymore. It's about winning the lane through pushing it and then roaming, or just naturally laning, and then any damage that you get onto them, if you get a Dark Harvest stack for poking them, then that's better than the damage that you get from Electrocute, because the damage from Electrocute isn't going to kill them. So think of it as a stacking scaling option that still gives you damage from the Keystone. You could also run Summon Aery. This option gives you a lot more power in the laning phase, as Summon Aery with Scorch is just going to give you way more damage and the ability to win lanes that you otherwise couldn't. I think you should look to run Summon Aery into most melee matchups, because almost every single melee champion is super weak to Zoe early, and so long that you're abusing them levels 1 to about 7, then the matchup's going to be in your favor versus not. You could also run it in solo queue, I suppose, into hyper scaling matchups. So let's say you were playing against like a Veigar. If you want to bank on the Veigar player being bad, you are going to beat them a lot harder and put them in a lot worse lane states with Summon Aery than you could with other runes. But it is riskier and you do have to be better. So generally put, Summon Aery is for way more damage in the lane, but you have to get value out of that extra damage in the early laning phase, or else it becomes a pretty bad rune. The interesting thing with Zoe is with Summon Aery is that Summon Aery's cooldown is based on how long it takes it to come back to you. So you damage the enemy, Summon Aery goes to them. But with Zoe, whenever you're winning, particularly whenever you use a summoner spell, you get her W, and then you're able to run the enemy down and basically just be right on top of them. In which case you can get a lot of Summon Aery procs off, and you don't have to damage them with abilities to get this off either, because it works with auto attacks as well. So it's going to be your best bet for lanes in which you could poke them down early against basically every melee champion in the game, man, other than tanks. Don't run this into most tanks. And then Unsealed Spellbook. Unsealed Spellbook is an interesting option to give you value from the runes where you otherwise couldn't get it. So against hyperscaling matchups, or against most, you could also run this into tank matchups. So let's say if you didn't want to have the stacking component of Dark Harvest, but would rather have the utility from Unsealed Spellbook to help deal with the enemy champions versus having more damage against them, then Unsealed Spellbook can be a fine option because of the utility it offers. If you have a barrier, a heal, a ghost, a cleanse, an ignite, any of those in a fight that you otherwise wouldn't have, then it's probably going to be more useful into a lot of the tankier matchups in the mid lane than the damage from Dark Harvest would be, given most team comps. It also gives you a bit more agency in that sense, and lets you play more aggressive in that sense. As weird as that sounds, Dark Harvest is probably more defensive against a lot of tank champions. With Unsealed Spellbook 2, it's a good option as if your runes aren't going to do anything in the laning phase against tankier champions in the mid lane. The best example I could give would be like Galio. Galio would withstand Summon Aery. He would withstand Electrocute. Like, you could run Dark Harvest against him, but where the laning phase is going to be nullified in both ways, Galio could push out the wave and he can sustain your damage. Something like Unsealed Spellbook just lets that part of the matchup be not a loss versus if you do just run the standard runes on Zoe in that type of matchup, then it is kind of just a loss. Because with Unsealed Spellbook, it's kind of a scaling rune where you get your first summoner spell swap at 6 minutes, and then the more you swap, the lower cooldown of Unsealed Spellbook, so that you can have more summoner spells up for basically just more fights. And then through having those summoner spells are going to be giving you more utility. So that's the value of them, and generally that's really it with Zoe Runes in terms of her Keystone options, and those are like, that's the value that they give you. So again, Electrocute for the burst, Dark Harvest for scaling, Summon Aery for poke, and then Unsealed Spellbook for utility. Unsealed Spellbook into tank matchups or matchups that you can't win the lane very hard, or hyper scaling matchups. Summon Aery for into most melee champions, except for tanks, and then helps you win lane early. So that's a general overview of the Zoe runes. Now I'm just going to go really in depth with every single rune options that she has. So yeah, if this video helped you, leave a like before you leave. Alrighty, peace out to the people who left. For Electrocute, with Electrocute, hitting an enemy with 3 separate attacks or abilities deals bonus adaptive damage. That damage is based on your level, and then also 0.25 of your ability power, so that's not too bad. And then it's on a 25 to 20 second cooldown, so it's basically always 20 seconds. Electrocute functions not only as a burst tool, but also as a laning tool, because you can pretty easily proc this even without landing your E on Zoe. So with this, if you're proccing it, let's say even if you land the E, if you proc it in any way, you're dealing a good amount of damage to the enemy that's going to stick, and then 20 seconds later you can look to all in when the Electrocute is back up. So that's where you get a lot of value out of it. And then if you have Ignite in most lanes, the damage that you deal with it once is going to put the enemy under a lot of pressure and a lot of actual threat of dying once Electrocute is back up, or even if they're low enough, then just if you were to land another E or whatnot. So Electrocute's a really strong laning tool. For the third runes here, you have good options in for the second runes, you have good options in Taste of Blood and Sudden Impact. Taste of Blood is probably going to be your best bet in most matchups, as it's your better laning tool, and Zoe is really about her lane. Even though you could have more damage with Sudden Impact, with Zoe you're better off getting more damage through your itemization than you would be through getting it through Sudden Impact. And with Taste of Blood, it helps you win lane harder, and then through winning lane, that's going to create a bigger itemization deficit, which is probably going to equate to more damage that you're dealing, and then also less damage that the enemy's dealing, so long that you're winning the lane. So with Taste of Blood, you heal whenever you damage an enemy champion. That heal is based on your level, and then also based on 0.1 of your AP, so not that impactful on the AP. It's mostly just based on your level, and then it's on a 20-second cooldown as well. So basically the exact same cooldown as Electrocute, and really just goes hand in hand with how you should be trading. About every third Q, and should probably be cast on the enemy champion. And then when you're doing that and then you're landing them, you're just going to be building up more poke, and then also having more effective HP to play with because of Taste of Blood. Because even if the enemy is not retaliating any abilities, you're still probably going to be taking minion damage. So you can be offsetting that at the very least. In the best case scenario, you're just getting like about 80 HP every minute. So really strong rune, especially when you pair it with something like Corrupting Potion. It really makes the early trades so much more in your favor. With Sudden Impact, after you use your flash or your ult, you would gain 7 lethality or 6 magic penetration for 5 seconds. Like, this is alright. That magic penetration is pretty good. It's just that Taste of Blood is such a dominant laning tool that I like with Electrocute, I think Taste of Blood's probably better in the same matchups in which you would run it, because Taste of Blood's also really, really useful into the mage champions that you would want to run Electrocute into, such as Syndra. With Dark Harvest, I could see Sudden Impact being more useful because you're scaling anyways, and then that magic penetration, and I suppose the lethality goes a lot further into the later stages of the game. And it also gives you access to more magic pen than you otherwise could have. So let's say if you were Luden, Sorkpin, Boots, Oblivion, or Leandries, you could just have 6 more magic penetration with Sudden Impact. And where it's on a 4-second cooldown, it basically lines up with your ultimate cooldown. So anytime you'd be ulting in with a Q, you could just be dealing more damage. My problem with this is that it's really just to amplify the damage on your Q, because you're probably going to be landing the E, and then it's going to be giving you 6 magic penetration on your Q, and then maybe an auto attack, and then maybe the W. So it's really, really hard to get actual value out of Sudden Impact for Zoe, because it's kind of anti-synergistic with her kit, and you lose out on this very, very useful laning tool in Taste of Blood that if you're running the Domination tree, you probably are playing for the lane anyways. For the third runes here, you're choosing how you build up the ability power from them. With Zombie Ward, it's through clearing wards. With Ghost Poro, it's through placing wards. And then with Eyeball Collection, it's through getting kills or assist. Eyeball Collection is generally the easiest to use. If you're at lower MMRs, I'd recommend you just use it, as it's very, very basic. You get kills and assist, you get more ability power. With Ghost Poro, you have to be deliberate with how you stack it up, because you have to be placing wards early. With Ghost Poro, it also extends the duration of your vision, so that can be useful to protect yourself in the mid lane. So it has that extra utility as well. So at higher MMRs and for better mid laners, Ghost Poro is the better option for Zoe, but in general, I would recommend Eyeball Collection. With Zombie Ward, Zoe's not a champion like Echo or Kiana or like Talon or Fizz, where they would want to abuse the Fog of War a lot. So even if you were to get a sweeper early, I don't think Zombie Ward would be that useful. Those type of champions too, the enemy mid laner wants to ward against them, so Zombie Ward becomes more impactful, as you're able to clear their wards, provide vision for yourself with the vision that they placed, and then also get attack damage or ability power from it. For the fourth rune here, you really don't have great options. You have Ravenous Hunter, Relentless Hunter, and then Ultimate Hunter. You could run Ingenious Hunter, I suppose, if you were running Glacial, but I don't think Glacial is really that useful for Zoe, even into the comps that it would be good into. With Ravenous Hunter, you heal for a percentage of damage dealt by your abilities. With Relentless Hunter, you gain out of combat movement speed, and then with Ultimate Hunter, you gain 5% cooldown on your ult. If Ultimate Hunter is fully stacked, it could be pretty useful, as you, even though you're taking like 0 point something of a second off your ultimate, depending on how many stacks you have of Ultimate Hunter, that can still be kind of impactful in a fight. But generally, Ravenous Hunter is just always going to be giving you more value, because it's just giving you more effective HP. And where Zoe can deal like tons of damage, most of the time you're going to be just 100% HP, but whenever fights like go the wire, Ravenous Hunter is giving you more HP, versus any of the utility from the other runes aren't really that useful. Ultimate Hunter really has to have like 3 stacks before it's useful, and then Relentless Hunter, the out of combat movement speed, like it could help you roam, but roams are going to happen anyways if you're going to get them. So I think Ravenous Hunter is like really the only option, because the other options are just so much more useless basically. Ravenous Hunter isn't terribly useful, but the effective HP it gives you is okay. And with Ravenous Hunter, you heal for a percentage of damage dealt by your abilities, and then this stacks up per unique takedown. So whenever you kill the top laner, that's a unique takedown. You kill the jungler, that's another unique takedown, etc., etc. So stacking that up is pretty easy for Zoe, as she's a mage and then also has a lot of AoE. So even if you aren't actually like really deserving of an assist in a fight, you're going to get one probably anyways. So it's pretty easy to stack this up, and then come late game, it could make the difference in a fight, and if it does, it's better than having out of combat movement speed or like 0.2 of a second off your ult or something. For the secondary runes, I think your best bet's going to be in Sorcery or Inspiration. With Sorcery, you have good options in Mana Flow Band, Transcendence. You also have a really interesting option in Nimbus Cloak. With Nimbus Cloak, After you cast a summoner spell, you gain a movement speed increase that lasts for 2.5 seconds and allows you to pass through units. This movement speed increase is very, very easy for Zoe to use because she can pick up summoner spells and then not even have to cast her own to get that movement speed increase. And whenever she does so, she can be really, really aggressive in the lane. And also in team fights, whenever she's picking up a lot of spells, just being able to zoom around, whether you're using it offensively or defensively, moving into the enemy or away from them, Christ, like it's getting so much value. And you really don't need the mana from Mana Flow Ban anymore. You get it through itemization, and then you also get it through blue buff. And if you're not getting blue buff on Zoe, I mean, you could leave the game. It's an option. I would never leave a game of League of Legends. I never have, and I never will, especially if my ally took blue buff when I was on Zoe. For the other runes, you have okay options in Transcendence. Transcendence gives you 10% CDR at level 10, and then also converts excess CDR to extra ability power. Absolute Focus gives you ability power when you're above 70% HP. Gathering Storm gives you ability power per 10 minutes. And then Scorch gives you extra damage on your abilities. If you're running Electrocute, Taste of Blood, I don't think Scorch is going to be that useful in most matchups. There are going to be matchups in which, like let's say melee matchups, in which, geez, it'd be a very niche thing, but in which Electrocute would be better, where you're only going to kill through the burst versus the poke from Aery. Maybe Scorch would be okay in those matchups. It'd be pretty akin to like how Zed uses Scorch. But in general, Transcendence is probably going to be your best option, as it lets you get 40% CDR with just one item. So if you have Luden's Echo, Transcendence, and blue buff, you get 40% CDR, and then you're able just to siege really hard, team fight a lot better, etc., etc. And to trade that off for like ability power from Absolute Focus, it's all right. But it's not going to change things. If you're trying to play more aggressively in the early game, I suppose Absolute Focus is completely fine, as it does just give you access to more damage. But a more consistent option is probably Transcendence. And then you could also go a bit of a just all in your laning with Biscuit Delivery and Time Warp Tonic. With Biscuit Delivery, you receive a biscuit every 2 minutes until 6. The biscuits restore 10% of your missing health and mana, and then permanently increase your mana by 50. So whenever you use these, they're effectively acting like Mana Flow Band, where they're giving you 200 mana eventually. And they also are going to help you in the laning phase, where they're going to give you the mana to cast 1 or 2 more abilities, and also a little bit of HP, like very minuscule amounts of HP. But with Biscuit Delivery plus Taste of Blood plus Corrupting Potion and Time Warp Tonic, it makes it very, very difficult for the enemy to like really contest you early, even if like you're tanking all their abilities and the minion wave. With Time Warp Tonic, consuming a potion or biscuit grants you 50% of its HP or mana regeneration immediately, and then also gives you 5% movement speed. So just a lot of laning tool with Biscuit Delivery and Time Warp Tonic in combination with Electrocute and Taste of Blood, if you wanted to go this route. And then for the shards, it's going to be Adaptive Force, and then Armor or Magic Resist, depending on your matchup. So yeah. With the difference of like Sorcery or Inspiration, like if it's really just a matter of like, are you going to survive the early game, or are you going to win the early game? If so, probably go Sorcery, because Nimbus Cloak and Transcendence is really, really strong tools for like doing that. Or there's strong rewards for winning or surviving the early game. So if you're winning, it's good. If you're surviving, it's good. With Inspiration, it gives you better tools to win the early game even harder, no matter what. But the reward for doing so is only having won the lane. You don't get actual stats for it, but you get extra tools to help you do that. So that's the trade-off that you face with it, and really the only decision to be made with it. So that's that with the Electrocute page. With Dark Harvest, I don't think much would change. Even if you were playing with Dark Harvest, I think that Taste of Blood's still probably your better bet. Only in matchups where it would be like only wave clear, like let's say if you were playing against a Nivea or something and you were running Dark Harvest, I suppose you could run Sudden Impact. But even then, like if you take any damage at all, Taste of Blood is just giving you more effective HP. And with Dark Harvest, since you're playing to scale, I think that you should definitely run the Sorcery tree with Nimbus Cloak and then Transcendence, as again, it's just a better reward for surviving the early game. So that's really it with the Dark Harvest page. With Summon Aery, you end up in the Sorcery tree, Again, this page is just for winning lane. So obviously the secondary runes are going to be Biscuit Delivery and Time Warp Tonic. You could go secondary Domination with Taste of Blood, Ravenous Hunter, but with Ravenous Hunter you have to stack this up, and that's my problem with it, is that by the time Ravenous Hunter's healing is going to be impactful, it's at a stage in the game in which it's not really useful for the Aery page. So with Summon Aery, damaging a champion with basic attacks or abilities sends Aery to them, dealing damage based on your level, and then also off 0.1 of your AP, so the AP really isn't that impactful. But the cooldown of it is how long it takes Aery to come back to you. So again, whenever you're running someone down, especially whenever you're casting the summer spells that you pick up or the items that you pick up, you're most likely going to be able to stay on the enemy champion with those, and then with that, you're getting more damage off with Summon Aery just because you're closer to them. In a standard lane, let's say if you're playing against like a Talon early, every time you're auto-attacking them, you're just dealing 10 more damage. Anytime you land a Q, it's just 10 more damage over and over and over and over again. That damage really builds up very, very quickly. Whenever you all in, that damage is like basically is always going off. So it's way easier to build up damage with this, and without it, you're basically reliant on comboing the enemy champion. So if you can't land an E on them, you're really not going to kill someone on Zoe with the other options like Electrocute and Dark Harvest. But with Aery, you only have to land your Q, the damage from your W, and then your auto attacks, and you could be killing champions, especially the squishier melee champions. Into tanks, this option's really bad, as the damage that you're going to be building up with it isn't going to be impactful enough. So if you were playing against like Ornn, Scion, Galio, etc. in the mid lane, Summon Aery is just not going to be as useful. So yeah, with Summon Aery, it puts you in the sorcery tree. I still think Nimbus Cloak's probably going to be your best bet, especially where you have so much mana in the early game from Biscuits and Corrupting Potion. I don't think you need Mana Flow, as it's for the mid game, and you're not going to run out of mana in the mid lane so long that you're getting blue buff, and even if you aren't, you're probably going to be fine. And then for the third runes, I suppose running Absolute Focus is fine with this rune page. You could still run Transcendence. It has the exact same values. It's a reward for surviving or winning the early game, or just getting to level 10 in general, where you're getting 10% cooldown reduction. So, but with Absolute Focus, while you're above 70% HP, you get the bonus ability power, and then with that extra ability power, you're able to just deal more damage to the enemy when you have advantage. So basically, how this page would play out would be like you're poking them early, and then they try to turn onto you. But then with the damage that you built up on them initially, then you're able to win the all-in, kind of like a Jace or something. So for the fourth rune, it would be Scorch. With Scorch, your damaging abilities that hit the enemy champions just deal more damage based on your level, and then is on a 10-second cooldown. So basically every single time you're landing a Q, you're probably getting the Scorch damage off as well. And Scorch in combination with Summon Aery is just building up so much damage against the enemy laner early. Even if the damage numbers on Summon Aery and Scorch aren't like, astronomical at the end of the game, like watch a replay and then watch how the numbers build up minutes like 0 to 11, because that's really when it's most impactful, or when you should be getting the most value out of it. And it still continues to be useful into the mid and late game, but it's mostly just so you can win your lane. So where you're trying to win your lane, I think Inspiration is going to be your best bet. All the other options are like basically scaling options for Zoe. Like you could still have Taste of Blood, and then like I suppose Eyeball Collection, but again, I think you should really be trying to all in your lane and your early power. With Biscuits as well, Biscuits offset the early mana restraints that Zoe could have through giving her 200 mana around 6 minutes. So with that, you could build Sorkpin Boots into just Amp Tome and then maybe a Dark Seal, and not have any mana issues without having to build a Lost Chapter into the matchups that you'd be running this page. So you have that advantage as well. And then with Time Warp Tonic, it's the same deal, where it's going to be giving you more value out of your Corrupting Potion and Biscuits early, and then help you win the lane. So really dominant page for Zoe, especially in solo queue, as it lets you win lanes so hard, and into the champions that it's strong into, it's your best bet, as if you're not running this, then you're really just letting them get away with the laning phase, and like for what? Exactly, alrighty. So the last Keystone that I think is worth mentioning is Unsealed Spellbook. With Unsealed Spellbook, it functions as a pretty okay scaling tool for matchups in which you can't really interact with the enemy champions. So think about hyperscaling champions like Vigar, Anivia, Malzahar, champions that you can't beat in lane no matter what damage rune you have, like Galio. Nothing else is really coming to my mind. So really just late game champions and hyper scaling ones that negate the laning phase altogether is when you should look to run Unsealed Spellbook, not only on Zoe but on most control mages in general. With Unsealed Spellbook, you can swap your equipped summoner spells to a new one, a new single use one, and then each unique summoner spell you swap to permanently decreases your cooldown of Unsealed Spellbook by 20 seconds. So you get your initial swap at 6, and then the cooldown is 4 minutes. So you get your first one at 6, and then you swap it, and then you reduce the cooldown to 340, and then it just keeps going down throughout the entire game. And you can really waste the early Unsealed Spellbook summoner spell swap, because the matchups in which you're running this, you're probably running teleport as well. So you could swap to an ignite and just use it on your lane opponent just to gain a little bit of an advantage. Not even in an all-in, just in a small trade. And then you can do the same with a barrier, a heal, a cleanse, a ghost, etc. And then by swapping it very rapidly, by the time mid-game comes, you can have 2 summoner spells as the fight starts, and then also have your flash once you use both summoner spells during the fight. So you can have effectively 3 combat summoner spells that the enemy has to deal with. And especially things like cleanse and heal, they help you and potentially your team so much against the type of champions that you would be running this into anyways. And it's just a really solid option because of the value that the summoner spells give you, but also where you couldn't really get value out of the other runes into those matchups anyways. So like if you have an electrocute against Anivia, if you land your bubble on her, yeah, she's dead, but like if she's playing properly and just permanently pushes the wave into you and doesn't get hit by a bubble, then come mid game, like if she has Unsealed Spellbook and has like a ghost and like a cleanse and whatnot, like what do? You land the bubble, she cleanses it. Now what? Like how you? It's yeah. So to build up the damage is unrealistic in the laning phase. So having any of the laning tools in Electrocute or Aery becomes a lot less valuable. And then even with a damage rune like Dark Harvest, it's not like you're playing into the tank matchups in the mid lane where you could potentially build up Dark Harvest through poking them in lane without killing them. Against these champions that would negate the laning phase entirely, like Ziggs, Malzahar, Anivia, etc. Like against those matchups, you're not going to be able to proc Dark Harvest because they're going to be pushing the wave into you. So in those matchups, Unsealed Spellbook gives you value past the laning phase because there is no laning phase to be had. And that's really the value of it. So with Unsealed Spellbook, it puts you in the inspiration tree. All 3 of these secondary runes are okay. Hextech Flash, you could get some value out of it, especially with how Zoe's W works, but it's a bit cheesy. With Magical Footwear, it's going to be your most consistent option as you're saving 300 gold and then also gaining 10% movement speed, or 10 movement speed. With Magical Footwear too, where the laning phase is being negated, you kind of are matching the enemy's economic battle by saving 300 gold. With Perfect Timing, you could have the one-time stopwatch. If you're playing into champions that this would be good against, mainly like engage or catch champions, then sure, maybe look to run Perfect Timing instead of Magical Footwear. But Magical Footwear is going to be your best like default in this sort of matchup. And then for the third rune here, I think Futures Market is probably going to be your best bet. Futures Market versus Biscuit Delivery. Biscuit Delivery is good with the Electrocute and Summon Aery because you're trying to win lane in a different way. And the value of Biscuit Delivery can also be viewed in the mana that it offers early. And in the matchups in which Electrocute and Summon Aery would be good, Zoe could benefit from not having to build something like Lost Chapter early and instead building like Sorkpin Boots, Amp Tomes into the Ludens, but Blasting Wand, Dark Seal, etc. With a matchup like this where you'd be playing into, again, just wave clear champions, Anivia, Malzahar, etc., Futures Market's going to be way better because it lets you build Lost Chapter before them. And if you can get back into lane with your teleport, with the Futures Market purchase Lost Chapter into those champions, you can lock them into lane and really, really ruin their life. So Lost Chapter or Futures Market is a really, 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 really important rune into those matchups if you're using it for that reason. And then later into the game, it can also be kind of useful. as you're able to teleport back into fights with items that you just shouldn't have. So like completing a Death Cap or a Leandry's at certain times that where you would be spending so much gold to get it at that time, but if you win a team fight with it, you can just continue to have value. So it's mostly just for that Lost Chapter purchase though. For the 4th rune here, I think your best bet's going to be Cosmic Insight. You don't need Approach Velocity, and you don't need Time Warp Tonic with Unsealed Spellbook and then in those matchups. With Cosmic Insight, it's going to give you 5% cooldown reduction on your abilities, summoner spells, and items. Pretty generally useful. It's not wildly useful, but it's kind of a nice thing to have just for free. It also increases the summoner spell cap to, or the summer, what am I saying? The cooldown reduction cap to 40 to 45%. For the secondary runes, I think you should be going with all scaling. You could potentially run Mana Flow with these, but I think Nimbus Cloak's still going to be your best bet. With Nimbus Cloak, you're also gaining a lot of value from the Unsealed Spellbook because every time you cast any of the summoner spells, you're gaining a ton of movement speed, and then with that movement speed, you can actually get into an offensive position temporarily so you can land a bubble onto these wave clear champions that are trying to avoid the entire game. So really, really strong. And then Transcendence is going to be your best option with this, as it's giving you the cooldown reduction to continue to wave clear. You could potentially run Gathering Storm, but I think Transcendence is just going to be more useful than it. So yeah, that's about every single rune on Zoe that's really meaningful and worth talking about. The only thing I really didn't mention was Precision, where you could have Presence of Mind and Coup de Grace. Where Zoe stands right now, these runes are really, really useless, as you're going to be killing champions anyways. You don't need the damage from Coup de Grace. It's 8% more to champions with less than 40% health, as you are one-shotting targets from like 60% health, so that loses a lot of value. You don't need the mono regen from Presence of Mind. Champions like Vel'Koz use this a lot better, where they actually exhaust their entire mana pool. Cut down could be okay, but to give up any of the laning tools and whatnot, everything in the precision tree is also just not so good. So cut down could be okay, but doesn't really outweigh the combination of the other runes and the other trees for any of the particular rune pages. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Zoe Runes. This video was really long, so please, for the love of God, subscribe. If this video helped you, leaving a like on the video helps me. Leave a comment about literally anything, and I'll be sure to read it. I've never not read a comment ever. Thanks. Love Zoe. Love gaming. Love getting one shot from across the map. Awesome. League of Legends. Bye-bye. Okay, for real though, like, subscribe. It really, when I see the number go up, I'm just like, damn, that's cool. That's pretty